papers trembled in my hands like autumn leaves, but not from the October wind filtering through my kitchen window. The letterhead was crisp, official, devastating. My ex-husband's lawyer claimed I was living in his house. His house. The same house where I had planted roses by the front door, where I had scraped and painted every wall, where I had cried myself to sleep after he walked out with someone 20 years younger. I set the letter down on the granite countertop we had chosen. Together 3 years ago, back when we still existed, the silence pressed against my eardrums like deep water. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed to pause, as if the entire house was holding its breath, waiting to see if I would fight or fold. Marcus had been gone for 8 months. 8 months of learning to sleep in the center of the bed, 8 months of cooking for one, 8 months of slowly remembering who I was before I became half of something that was supposed to last forever. And now this. This legal grenade thrown into the fragile peace I had built from the wreckage of our 15-year marriage. The morning light streaming through the window caught the diamond in my wedding ring, still stubbornly clinging to my finger, despite everything. I twisted it, remembering the day Marcus slipped it on, promising me forever in front of 200 people who probably knew he was lying before I did. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. He wanted the house, but had thrown away the woman who made it a home. I walked through rooms that suddenly felt foreign, as if seeing them through a stranger's eyes. The living room where we had hosted Christmas dinners, the den where he had his lazy Sunday football marathons, the bedroom where our marriage had slowly suffocated under the weight of his indifference and my desperate attempts to revive something, already dead. Every corner held memories, but now they felt like evidence in a case I didn't know I was supposed to be building. My phone buzzed against the marble. A text from my sister Sarah. "Coffee later. You sound stressed." I hadn't realized stress had a sound until it started living in my voice, creeping into my words like smoke under a door. I needed more than coffee. I needed a miracle, or at least a really good lawyer. The afternoon dissolved into phone calls and legal jargon that made my head spin. Consultation fees, retainer agreements, discovery processes. Each conversation felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, being told the only way forward was to jump and hope someone had remembered to pack a parachute. Marcus had resources, connections, a law firm that probably charged more per hour than I made in a week at the nonprofit, where I managed grants for domestic violence shelters. The irony wasn't lost on me. But as I sat in my car outside the lawyer's office, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, something flickered to life in my chest. Not hope exactly, but something harder, more determined. A voice that sounded like my grandmother's, whispering the words she used to say when I was small and afraid. "Sugar, sometimes the only way out is through." By evening, the house felt different. Not foreign anymore, but mine in a way it had never been when Marcus lived here. I moved through it like a detective gathering clues, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just about property or money or winning some twisted game. This was about the truth, and I was the only one who knew where all the bodies were buried. The legal system moved like honey in winter, each day stretching into weeks of depositions and document requests. Marcus played his part perfectly, the wronged husband forced to watch his ex-wife steal his life's work. He had always been good at performing, at making himself the hero of every story. In his version, I was the villain who had contributed nothing, who had merely existed in the shadow of his success. A pretty accessory, who had somehow managed to manipulate the system in my favor. His lawyer was a shark in an expensive suit, the kind of man who probably practiced his intimidating stare in the mirror each morning. During my deposition, he leaned back in his leather chair like a king holding court, firing questions designed to make me feel small, insignificant, temporary. "Mrs. Patterson, can you specify exactly what financial contributions you made to the down payment?" His voice dripped with condescension, as if he already knew the answer would reveal my inadequacy. I wanted to tell him about the sacrifices he couldn't quantify in dollars, the promotion I turned down because Marcus needed me to travel with him to client dinners. The graduate degree I postponed indefinitely to support his career when his startup was bleeding money. The inheritance from my father that I quietly funneled into Marcus's business account when he was too proud to ask, but desperate enough to take. But legal proceedings weren't interested in the invisible labor of being someone's wife, in the dreams deferred and ambitions dissolved to make room for his. The worst part wasn't the questions, or the lawyer's smug certainty. It was watching Marcus sit across from me, nodding along to lies we both knew were lies, his face arranged in an expression of wounded dignity. This was the man who used to whisper that he couldn't imagine life without me, who had once driven 4 hours in a snowstorm, just to surprise me with soup when I had the flu. Now he looked at me like I was a stranger, who had somehow conned her way into his life story. But memory is a strange thing. Sometimes it strikes like lightning, illuminating truths you had forgotten in the darkness of doubt. Sitting in that sterile conference room, listening to Marcus's lawyer paint me as a gold-digging opportunist, I remembered something that made my spine straighten and my voice grow steady. I remembered the day we bought the house, the moment that changed everything, the detail that would make his lawyer's confident smirk disappear like morning mist. The house had been my find, my obsession, my dream wrapped in brick and mortar. I was the one who spent months driving through neighborhoods, scrolling through listings, attending open houses while Marcus complained about wasting weekends. I was the one who fell in love with the wraparound porch and the bay windows, who could see past the peeling paint and overgrown garden to the home it could become. More importantly, I was the one with the credit score that made the mortgage possible. Marcus's business ventures had left his finances looking like a war zone, all red flags and cautionary tales. My steady nonprofit salary, my pristine payment history, my careful financial planning had opened the door that his entrepreneurial chaos had slammed shut. The bank had been clear. The loan would be in my name. The deed would list me as the primary owner, and Marcus would be added as a co-owner only after his credit recovered. Except Marcus's credit never recovered, and somehow, in the daily grind of marriage and life and love, we both forgot that the paperwork had never been updated. I had owned that house alone for 3 years before he ever appeared on any legal document. And even then, I remained the primary owner, the one whose signature mattered most. I spent weeks in my home office, surrounded by boxes of documents that told the real story. Bank records showing my name on every mortgage payment, insurance policies listing me as the primary policyholder, tax records reflecting my homeowner's deductions, utility bills, maintenance receipts, renovation invoices, all bearing my signature, my responsibility, my financial fingerprints on every aspect of our shared life. The evidence painted a picture that Marcus's lawyer hadn't anticipated, a narrative that transformed me from opportunistic ex-wife to legitimate homeowner protecting her property from someone else's false claims. Each document was a breadcrumb, leading back to the truth he had convinced himself to forget. But the most powerful piece of evidence wasn't financial. It was emotional, though the law would never call it that. It was the folder of renovation plans, written in my handwriting, the color swatches and fabric samples I had collected, the garden journal where I had planned each season's plantings. It was proof that I hadn't just lived in that house. I had loved it into existence. Room by room, season by season, dream by dream. The night before our court date, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my own life, and realized something that made me laugh until tears came. Marcus hadn't just lied to the court about owning the house. He had lied to himself so completely that he believed his own fiction. In his mind, his presence had somehow transferred ownership, as if love or marriage or simply being male was enough to claim what had never been his. I slept better that night than I had in months, not because I was certain of victory, but because I was finally certain of truth. Whatever happened in that courtroom, I would walk in carrying facts instead of fears, evidence instead of excuses. For the first time since receiving that first threatening letter, I felt like myself again, like the woman who had earned every inch of the life Marcus was trying to steal. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and desperation. That particular blend of fear and hope that clings to places where people's lives get decided by strangers in black robes. I walked through the metal detector carrying a briefcase full of truth, my steps echoing in corridors that had witnessed 1,000 other battles between what was fair and what was legal. Marcus was already seated at the plaintiff's table with his shark lawyer, both of them radiating the confidence that comes with believing your own propaganda. He had chosen his outfit carefully, the navy suit that made him look trustworthy, the tie I had given him for our 10th anniversary. Even his posture screamed wounded husband, shoulders slightly slumped as if bearing the weight of betrayal with noble resignation. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw something flicker in his expression. Surprise, maybe, at how calm I looked. Or recognition, perhaps, of the woman he had married 15 years ago, the one who had never backed down from a fight when she knew she was right. I had forgotten her too, somewhere in the years of compromising and accommodating and making myself smaller to fit into his vision of what a wife should be. Judge Morrison was exactly what central casting would order for a family court drama. Gray-haired, serious, with eyes that had seen every variation of human messiness and learned not to be surprised by any of it. She listened to Marcus's lawyer present his case with the kind of patience that suggested she had heard similar stories countless times before. Your Honor, my client invested 15 years of his life and considerable financial resources into this property. The dissolution of marriage should not result in his complete disenfranchisement from assets he helped build. The lawyer's voice was smooth, practiced, designed to make Marcus sound like the victim of some elaborate con game. Marcus took the stand with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his own narrative. He spoke about sweat equity and emotional investment, about how he had been the primary breadwinner during their marriage, about how the house represented not just property, but his dreams, his security, his future. His voice caught slightly when he mentioned our anniversary dinners in that dining room, the Christmas mornings by the fireplace, the life we had built together within those walls. For a moment, listening to him speak about our shared memories with such conviction, I almost believed him myself. Almost forgot that love doesn't transfer ownership, that presence doesn't equal possession, that paying for groceries doesn't make you eligible for the deed to the house. Then my lawyer called me to the stand and everything changed. We had rehearsed this moment, but nothing had prepared me for the feeling of speaking truth in a room full of people who had been listening to lies. My voice was steady as I explained the timeline, the financial reality, the careful documentation that proved what we all should have remembered from the beginning. Mrs. Patterson, can you explain to the court who secured the mortgage for this property? My lawyer's question was simple, straightforward, designed to cut through the emotional manipulation to the legal facts that actually mattered. I did. The mortgage is in my name only. My husband's credit history made it impossible for him to qualify for a loan of that size. The words felt powerful in my mouth, heavy with truth that couldn't be argued away or reframed or forgotten. The documents spoke for themselves. 3 years of sole ownership before Marcus was added to any paperwork. Bank records showing my name on every payment, every transaction, every piece of financial responsibility. Insurance policies, tax records, renovation receipts, all carrying my signature, my responsibility, my legal footprint on every aspect of homeownership. But the moment that changed everything wasn't when I presented the deed with my name clearly listed as primary owner. It wasn't when I showed the court my father's inheritance check that had made the down payment possible. It was when Judge Morrison asked Marcus a simple question that revealed the lie he had been telling himself as much as the court. Mr. Patterson, do you have any documentation showing your financial contribution to the down payment, or your name on the original mortgage? Her voice was neutral, professional, but I saw something shift in her expression as Marcus fumbled for an answer that didn't exist. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Marcus looked at his lawyer, at me, at the judge, searching for words that could bridge the gap between his fiction and the facts staring back at him from official documents. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier confidence, replaced by something that sounded almost like confusion. I thought we were married. I assumed that made it ours. The words hung in the air like smoke, revealing the fundamental misunderstanding that had led us all to this courtroom. He had confused love with ownership, marriage with property rights, presence with possession. Judge Morrison's smile was small, professional, but unmistakable. It wasn't cruel or mocking, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had spent decades untangling people's assumptions from legal reality. That smile told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth to deliver her ruling. The gavel came down like thunder, final and absolute. The court finds that Mrs. Patterson is the sole legal owner of the property in question. Mr. Patterson's claim is denied. 7 words that undid months of legal theater, that restored truth to its rightful place above wishful thinking and convenient fiction. I felt something break open in my chest, not with pain, but with relief so profound it made me dizzy. This wasn't just about winning or losing, about keeping the house or losing it to someone else's lies. This was about being seen, about having my truth recognized and validated by someone with the power to make it official. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions, like watching someone realize they had been reading the map upside down for years. Shock, denial, anger, and finally, something that looked almost like recognition. Maybe, in that moment, he remembered the woman who had made his dreams possible, who had sacrificed her own ambitions to fuel his, who had loved him enough to build a life he could walk into and feel like he owned. His lawyer was already whispering about appeals, about finding loopholes, about fighting the decision with the kind of desperation that comes with watching an sure thing crumble into dust. But I saw in Marcus's eyes that the fight had gone out of him. Maybe he was finally remembering the truth we had both somehow forgotten, or maybe he was just tired of pretending that wanting something was the same as deserving it. Outside the courthouse, the October air felt different, cleaner somehow, as if a storm had passed and left everything washed and new. I sat in my car for a long time, not ready to drive home yet, not ready to walk back into the house that was now legally, officially, undeniably mine. Sarah called while I was sitting there, her voice bright with anticipation. "How did it go? Do you still have a home?" Her question made me laugh, really laugh, for the first time in months. I had never stopped having a home. I had only briefly forgotten that I was the one who had built it. The victory wasn't just legal, though that mattered. It wasn't just financial, though keeping my home mattered too. It was something deeper, more fundamental, like finding a piece of myself that had been missing so long I had forgotten it existed. It was the recognition that I had never been the supporting character in my own life story, even when I had been content to play that role. The house felt different when I walked through the door that evening. Not because anything had changed, physically, but because I was finally seeing it clearly, without the filter of someone else's assumptions or expectations. This was mine, had always been mine, would continue to be mine. Not because a judge had said so, but because I had earned it, built it, loved it into existence. Room by room, payment by payment, dream by dream. I called my mother to tell her the news, and she cried with relief and pride. "I never liked how small you made yourself for that man," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so glad you remembered who you really are." Her words hit me like a revelation, because I realized she was right. I had spent years making myself smaller, quieter, more convenient, thinking that was what love required. The irony was perfect, and bitter, and somehow exactly right. Marcus had tried to claim the house, but in fighting for it, I had reclaimed something more valuable. Myself. The woman who had earned the credit score that made the mortgage possible. The woman who had chosen every paint color and planted every flower. the woman who had built a life worth fighting for, and then found the courage to fight for it. That night, I slept in the center of my bed in my house in my life, listening to the familiar sounds of home settling around me. The refrigerator's hum, the way the floorboards creaked when the temperature changed, the soft rustle of wind through the oak tree outside my bedroom window. These weren't just sounds anymore. They were the soundtrack of victory, the music of truth finally recognized. The legal papers would be filed, the appeals would be denied, the house would remain mine in every way that mattered. But the real victory was quieter, more personal, impossible to quantify in legal terms. It was the knowledge that I had faced someone's attempt to rewrite my story and refused to let them hold the pen. I had spent 15 years believing that love meant making room for someone else's dreams at the expense of my own. I had confused accommodation with affection, self-sacrifice with devotion, making myself smaller with making someone else bigger. But some lessons can only be learned in courtrooms, with judges and lawyers and official documents that don't care about feelings, only facts. The house stood around me like evidence, like proof, like a love letter I had written to myself without realizing it. Every room told the story of a woman who had known what she wanted and worked to make it real. The kitchen where I had learned to cook for two and then remembered how to cook for one. The garden where I had planted roses that would bloom long after the marriage that inspired them had withered. The office where I had built a career that could support the life I wanted to live. Winter came early that year, but I was ready for it. I had weathered harder seasons, survived colder truths, learned to build fires that could warm a house and a heart that had learned to beat for one person instead of two. The snow fell like forgiveness on the roof that was mine, covering the garden that would bloom again in spring, blanketing the home I had fought for and won not once, but twice. Sometimes I think about Marcus, wonder if he ever figured out the difference between wanting something and earning it, between loving someone and owning them, between building a life and claiming credit for someone else's construction. But mostly I think about the future, about the woman I became in that courtroom, about the life I reclaimed when I remembered that I had never stopped deserving it. The deed sits in my safe now, my name clear and undisputed on every line. But the real document of ownership is written in every careful choice I made, every payment I earned, every dream I refused to surrender. I am the author of my own life story, the architect of my own home, the hero of my own happy ending. And when spring comes, I will plant new roses by the front door, not because someone else might admire them, but because I have learned to love the woman who will tend them, season after season, year after year, in the house that was always hers.